about more so today. I think that one of the things that I have learned through this work is this sense of understanding teaching, learning, word making, and theory making as the same process. And this is something that I learned from my students when I stepped into the classroom, where we normally think of, we walked in and I realized that I truly didn't know how to teach. I didn't know what teaching meant, and it was the students who sort of like really taught me what it means to be a community college educator, despite, and I should have said this, that I'm doing this research in the same institution that I went to and graduated from as an undergrad. And part of my work also calls for self-honesty and responsibility to future generations. And that sometimes means confronting our own arrogance as educators, our savior complexes, and so on. And while I am going to be sort of really highlighting the work of community college students and the magic they make in the classroom, I also want to sort of like warn against romanticizing students or placing on them the burden to save the education system. Next slide, please. And so the central question for my dissertation work is, how do community college students' hopes, fears, dreams, and commitments to other worlds open up a space to co-generate new psychological theories that might point us towards different directions in the field, but also in education more generally? So what I'm trying to do is, we typically in the literature, community college students are viewed through a deficit lens, and or how community students are transformed by academia and theory. And I'm much more interested in the process in which students are themselves transforming the field and transforming theory as they engage with the materials in the classroom. Next slide. The next slide. And then here are some questions that I'm currently sitting with, and these are questions that I don't have an answer for. So the first one is, how might we, through our teaching, be getting in the way of something else from emerging? What would students think, feel about my claims, like the students I work with? How would they feel about my dissertation work? How can my work be more accountable and responsible to students and their worlds, and not just to academia or myself? And what might I not be sensing and therefore be making invisible in my research? Yeah, so that's pretty much some of the ideas that we'll be engaging with today.
Thank you, Francisco. Up next, we are going to be hearing from Kushya Sugarman.
Hi, everyone. So my dissertation is Fugitivity and Resistance in and Beyond the Classroom, Reimagining Teacher Education Through Participatory Design Research. Next slide. So in order to understand this question, or the questions that I have in my dissertation, you need to know a little bit about myself. So I'm a fourth grade teacher and also a teacher educator. And I teach in a predominantly white conservative school district. And so I'm struggling with a lot of opposing forces. One of which I'm constantly thinking about is how to stay with the kids, how to join in their kind of constant rebellion that they're always undergoing against even myself and who I am in the classroom to them. And then again, how do I keep my job, right? Because I have 2 kids at home, and also as a woman of color to join in as somebody who is helping students to develop narratives of themselves that are outside of the narratives of innocence and other not helpful narratives that maybe their parents or society might be creating for them. So this puts me in a really contradictory spot that requires a lot of reflection and constant recalibration in order to move in the right direction. And so one way that I found that I could do that is through my students, my former students more specifically, that we are engaging, which I'll talk about in the next slide a little bit, in what I hope is going to be a speculative practice where moving from students' own rebellions, we are finding ways to join in their fight. So I'm not the first person to think about this. I again am building off of Anna Stetsenko's work. Also Erica Berman I've been reading recently, Moten and Harney, specifically about how they write about the university as a workplace that you can also subvert. So that's really important to my works, how the classroom, the K-12 classroom, is a workplace, but it's also has possibilities for subverting the structures within communities. And then, sorry, this must be very embarrassing, but I also have learned a lot from Francisco and the scholars that he's introduced me in about how things are constantly changing. So the world that I had as a student was not the world that my students are inhabiting right now, and what that means for our hopeful solidarity. And so it's like, yeah, it's one thing to say that you are going to move alongside your students, and then it's another, when your student is like writing with their left hand because they like want to do something to be rebellious and to do something to exert who they are, but you also can't read their writing. So like, how do you find the balance? What do you do to move forward is my question that I'm going to engage in. So next slide, please. All right. So, like I said, kind of the problem that I created this emergent teacher education collective, which is a group of my former students. It's 4 of my former students and a Brazilian postdoctoral student who's also a Portuguese teacher. And we've been meeting once a month. It's just the preliminary part to think about how we can do what I just discussed, that teacher education research doesn't join in the fight that teachers are having to constantly undergo. And
I'm good, thank you.
Hi, Jordan. That they're trying to constantly undergo, and how they can grow their own fugitive classes in the join their own fugitive practices in the classroom. So we're meeting once per month to discuss our classrooms and to engage in activities that we design together. So that once one of the participants, but really the co-researchers, she's been learning about cognitive mapping. So we're going to try like some cognitive mapping. And I can talk more about specific activities if that's of interest. But in addition to the meetings itself, another thing that I'm very excited about is that as a participatory design project, the participants are also analyzing the data from the meetings, and like that we're doing coding together, we're discussing emergent themes, and then we're planning our next meetings in collaboration. And then, so my hypothesis is not only will the meetings be helpful, because I kind of know that they're going to be helpful because we're creating this community together, but will the research itself, this like extra layer that we're adding in, would that deepen our fugitive planning and our speculative practice? Is that going to be of value to my students or my former students? And then the last piece, which I'll talk about in the next slide, is that so far it's been only the preliminary stuff, but here's the preliminary findings that I wanted to talk a little bit about, and I can talk more about it later if you want. So first of all is just the richness of the children's refusal and their acts of resistance. The kids just come up with like such wonderful ways to express their humanity, which is sometimes can be problematic, you know, for the culture of the classroom. So it's really a constant dance that we're engaging in order to be like who we want to be with our students. For instance, one of the students, he decided that he didn't want to do choice time, that was something that was like a reward that students would earn over the course of a week, you know, minutes plus, minutes minus, in one of my former students' classrooms. And so, you know, he really derailed the classroom in like really genius ways by getting, like, his goal was to like take minutes off rather than add minutes on. And just how, and so that was a real struggle for my student. Like, how can you create a classroom community that's not based on reward in this very like behavioralistic type of way? And then there are also all these unexpected tensions that came about, like, who are, you know, when you're engaging in this way with students, it's we don't have the models for this, right? Like, you're studying something that you don't have models for, and that often the structures are not trying to, you know, the structures of our school are not set up for this to flourish. So it really made teachers think differently. I said that's the last one, about their roles, about teaching and learning. And then for me, about these are my former students. So how can I engage with them differently, even though we have, there's a power imbalance? And then like research. So what is research? Which parts? Because the boundaries are really being broken, but in some ways I have to be very strict about what boundaries, about creating boundaries as well. Like right now, this is research. We're turning the camera on, this is recording. Whereas, you know, when they call me and things are going very bad, they need some advice, that is not research, that is not for the academy. And what, when to draw that line, and you know, having those awkward conversations has been really important. And then there's also just geography and space I can talk about a little bit more later on. Fugitivity versus resistance. So originally I was thinking, you know, as a veteran teacher and also as a Black woman, a mother, that we would really end up talking a lot about fugitivity and like ways of subverting but not outright resisting. But my students, again, as younger people with a different positionality on the, you know, they're not deep into this field yet. They actually are often, one has already quit her job and gotten another job. They're engaging in more outright resistance than I had expected. And so that's also something that I need to think more about. And then also times of just compliance, like when do you just kind of say like, that's not my battle? And then the rest I can talk about later. And so next slide. The last part, some questions that I'm thinking about. So this is a multiracial international group. So I'm often thinking, usually when this type of work specifically related to fugitivity, which is in the Black radical tradition, rooted in African enslaved people's resistance and running away towards something better, creating their own avenues for escape. That's very rooted, right, in the Black radical tradition. That's where I'm coming from. But how do I make room for the different types of resistance and fugitivity, this like constant study and struggle that that's coming out of the research based on my former students and co-researchers, based on their different positionalities, as one's a queer woman, one's like I said, a Brazilian postdoctoral student. So how do you create kind of a textural practice of solidarity there? And also, I would love to be able to bring some of these practices to my teacher education classrooms, but I don't know how yet. So that's some of the things that I'm thinking about. Thank you.
Thank you, Kushya. Thank you. So many wonderful things to come back to and keep talking about. We have two more panelists who are going to present. We have up next, Anna Stetsenko.
Hi, everyone. Good to see so many people. It's exciting. Thank you to Lydia and Andrea, of course, for organizing so well. And thank you also to Cisco and Kushya for inviting me here in the first place. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here. It's a reflection of, I think, our dialogue through a number of years, and really very productive dialogue that is reflective of what I want to talk about, which is about the need to stop teaching. I'm Anna Stetsenko. I'm in psychology and in urban education, and I'm happy to say I know many people here, but those I don't know, it's exciting to see you guys. I was reflecting a little bit before I start on the questions. I was reflecting on the title of our panel today, the Praxis of Transmutation, and I was mesmerized by the word transmutation. This is not prepared, just an exprompt, but I want to say it's such a wonderful term, and of course language is important, and transmutation brings across something that is definitely unfamiliar, unexpected, with great degree of uncertainty, I think. So it really is a powerful word, in contrast to what is more often used, the term transformation, right? And I could have imagined also practice of transformation, but transformation includes some certainty, and transmutation, it's really venturing into the unknown. I would love to hear from Andrea and Lydia about whether they have this in mind or if I'm off the topic. But for me, transmutation brings about really like mutant, something we don't know what is coming. That's the sense. And I think it's very timely because we don't know what is coming. And as also Kushya was saying about things changing so rapidly, absolutely, like we might not know what happens tomorrow, or even today, if we look out of our windows, and before we look out, we don't know. So mutants, mutations, which connect so well with futurity and refusal and subverting. And transmutation, you say also about new species. And yes, maybe we do need to become new species and leave so much behind and unlearn so many things. I think it's my cat who wants to know too. How do we unlearn teaching? That's the first question. How do we unlearn teaching that is separated from learning? So I suggest the topic, stop teaching, and just this topic itself, I think, requires some way of pausing and thinking about that. This is not a new idea, but this is an idea of trying to make things radicalizing them to the extent that we are really forced to stop and think. We cannot teach. We have to unlearn teaching in a one-way, as a one-way street, as a top-down process. And we do it all the time. I'm not excluding myself. It's very difficult to stop teaching and to start teaching and learning. So really, as one process, which has to do also with the notion, I think, of connecting what more broadly is described often as us changing the world and being changed in the process. This is a very familiar trope to anyone who knows, for example, Marx, but also other scholarship of resistance, like changing the world and being changed by it, but not as two, but as one, as two in one and the same process, not separate, not one after the other, not one next to the other, not alongside. The same with teaching, learning, not next to each other, not one after the other, not one in addition to, but really as one. And that's the challenge, really, to stop teaching and to start teaching and learning as one. And of course, I'm so excited about Kushya and Cisco taking this up, because, and we thought even about the new word for a long time in various classes, like, could it be learning? Could it be teach learning? I know Kushya has a version, I'm not giving it away, so I'm keeping it if you want to share. But it's difficult to say it in one word, but that's what is required, I think, for us to wake up to the reality of impossibility of teaching anyone in this fashion of what is the traditional teaching. By the way, one of the best quotes I can add, which I didn't have on the slide, but this is by Victor L. Wooten, a songwriter, a singer, and I'm putting it in the chat. I thought he said it so well, a songwriter. You can only teach yourself until we live in a day where I can physically implant knowledge into your head. I can teach you nothing. I can only show you things. But it's one of the illustrations, beautiful saying by Maya Angelou, of course, which I want to put also in the chat just now, because of course I built on so many scholars and so much scholarship. Maya Angelou, who's speaking of her grandmother, said, "Sister, when you get, give. When you learn, teach." And please look up also Wooten. I didn't put his name, but I did look him up, and he seems to be quite amazing. So stop teaching, just the formulation itself. I think that's the thing I want to share, because I am excited about it. And I know it kind of, it can jolt people, especially in the, the context such as ARA, American Education Research Association, people are talking about teaching. So yes, the interface, the nexus of the two processes, the very difficult task takes a lot of theory. And Cisco, maybe you could do more on that in your teaching, and Kushya too, like to bring up directly these questions about what do we do to stop teaching? And we have to learn this. That also cannot come just from us. The notion of how do we stop teaching has to come from us learning from those who we are supposed to teach, but we cannot teach because we need to stop teaching. So it's practicalizing the message, I think, that is important. So maybe we go to the next slide, and do stop me if I overstep my time limit. So yes, there's one process. What does it take to do this? I think I'm trying to offer some preliminary steps, and one of those is to rework the very concept of the learner. And by the way, note that I don't have here the need to rework the concept of the teacher. Why? Because we are all learners in the first place, and teachers only in the second. So learner, the notion, the concept of learner is so much more basic. It's so much more primary than anything connected to teachers. We're learners in the first place. And that is also quite some work, and a lot of wonderful, beautiful work has been done. But I think that the need today is to do the work of transmutation. So I'm again appealing to Lydia and Andrea. I guess they both came up with this notion, but that's just taking our received notions and doing the work of transmutation, placing them upside down, turning them upside down, and definitely pausing and making the so much needed work with our students, which is not the best expression, but as we ourselves are students, then we can say, yes, doing it together with students. So I'm hoping also to draw attention to the need to work the concept, of course, of knowledge. And that is a huge topic, because so much needs to be radicalized. The concept of reality. Oh, that's my favorite. Yes, to rework the concept of reality. What is out there? What is reality? That's quite possibly the most radical notion that needs to be changed, radically transmutated, because so much of scholarship is still in the notion of, oh yeah, you know, the traditional notions of objectivity, of reality, of neutrality, of course, and physics envy. So this comes as a set of issues, I think. That's what is challenging about it, so that it cannot be just done the work at one level, and it cannot be done, of course, by one person. So I'm happy specifically to be on the panel, because it is a matter of dialogue, collaboration across people, across scholars, across us and students, especially, like Kushya said, younger people. There is something very special about younger people. They see and know something we have no way of knowing and seeing. I'm very much in favor of pushing us to see what we can learn from babies and from really young people. And babies teach us so much if we open our eyes and ears and souls and begin to learn in earnest. Yes, and in earnest and honest. Is it time now? I guess I didn't time myself, but I see Andrea nodding. I can definitely stop here and just dialogue more, because that is crisscrossing already all the other talks. Of course, also with Gladys and Joanna. I think there are so many interesting topics. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Anna. So we are going to invite Joanna to give her brief presentation of her work, and then spend what time remains with conversation amongst our panelists. So I see Joanna has taken over the screen share. Fantastic.
Hey, y'all. If you're open to it, take a breath or two, an intentional breath, a loving breath. It's a lot. It's been a lot lately. So yeah, show some love. Your body does a lot for you. Spirit does a lot for you. Yeah, so let me keep figuring out how to share. Okay, can someone confirm that they see the full screen?
Yep, I see it.
Okay, awesome. So this will be a multilingual, multisensory presentation, very short. So the medicine of la ciguanaba and honguitos means little mushrooms, ancestrality and supernatural healing justice. De pequeña escuchaba historias de los cadejos, la carreta chillona, brujos que se convierten en tacuacines y, por supuesto, la ciguanaba. La ciguanaba, from what I remember hearing, is a shapeshifter who likes to play tricks on men. I grew up hearing that La Ciguanaba shapeshifts into beautiful women. She uses her beauty and charming voice to lure men into isolated places such as the river or mountain. This woman isn't exactly who they thought she was. In fact, once she had lured the men into isolated places, La Ciguanaba shapeshifts into an ugly, supernatural creature. Her hair is long and dark and cascades over her head. Her face, she has a horse-like, horse-shaped face. Her feet turn backward, and her breasts are long and saggy, so much so that they reach her knees. My grandfather tells me that La Ciguanaba likes to play tricks on specific types of men, specifically those men who drink, those who are cheaters and abusers. La Ciguanaba, in other words, is almost like a feminist protector and an avenger. I think she's cool. So now I'm gonna share a very short audio of my grandfather recently telling me about La Ciguanaba. So let me see, I'm gonna play the audio and I'll figure out how to make it audible for y'all.
Son espíritus malignos que transformaban tal vez la vista de la gente. Miraban que iban por un buen camino. Allá adelante, ya cuando venían a ver, ya estaban encharralados. Entonces, ya allí se chispaba la ciguanaba, ya cuando los tenían los charrales. Por allá habían zampado en los charrales. Y claro, hay una historia bien trascendente de la ciguanaba con los hombres. Entonces vino, tenía la ciguanaba y ya se ponía a hacerles chistes. Y el hombre ya se quedaba ya bien asustado, ya perdía a la muchacha, ya no, la muchacha no iba a ver cuando la muchacha no llegaba, pues se daba con la ciudad. Se llevaba en forma de la muchacha.
You know, grandfather, he's telling me how, you know, she just loves playing tricks on men and she laughs, ha 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 ha, la ciguanaba, you know, she's cool, man. Okay, check it out. So I'm gonna keep sharing the presentation. 1 second. All right, share, present. Okay, cool. All right, let's do it. Now, do y'all see the full screen? Yeah. Okay, thank you. Psilocybin, los niños santos, honguitos. So I come from a legacy of farmers, my grandfather, and I mean, you know, I come from a legacy of farmers, medicine workers, herbalists, midwives, and doulas. Many have worked with plants and herbs, and others have worked with psilocybin. In fact, my grandmother's aunt used to brew psilocybin tea, which they called medicina. So I have been forming a relationship with psilocybin as a way to re-indigenize and ultimately help my body, mind, spirit heal from colonial and state violence wounds. Through this process, psilocybin medicine has been very gentle. So with this in mind, before I end, I want to offer a work in progress of a science fiction story that I am writing for an anthology that I am co-editing. So the story is trying to heal herself from the aftermath of a rape experience. Cosmica turns to psilocybin for support. In one of Cosmica's spiritual journeys, La Ciguanaba makes an appearance to Cosmica and tells them not to be scared, that she's there to help. La Ciguanaba knows that Cosmica comes from a lineage of healers, but also grievers. In fact, one of Cosmica's granduncles was forcibly disappeared during the US-backed civil war in El Salvador. In fact, close to 12,000 people were forcibly disappeared during the US-backed civil war in El Salvador. Many Salvadorans are still searching for answers and the whereabouts of their loved ones. So La Ciguanaba tells Cosmica that she knows where some of the people who were forcibly disappeared were buried. Cosmica, hoping to address one instant of interpersonal violence, is now asked to dive into a deeper and broader spiritual and political journey. This encounter was not a coincidence. It was written in the cosmos. This story shows how supernatural forces can support survivors of colonial, state, and interpersonal violence in their healing journeys. And beyond that, the spiritual forces can contribute to larger processes of transitional justice and healing justice. So I'll stop.
Thank you. Thank you to the panelists for taking us on a journey. I wanted us to share our slides and talk a little bit about our work before we got into the question section of our panel. And I want to invite the panelists to think of questions they want to ask each other. So that's why we did this sharing of slides ahead of the questions. But I want to begin with one question to all the panelists or whoever feels called to answer. Where are you in your work, and how does your relationship with yourself manifest through your work?
All right, I'll go. I was trying to be respectful, but I have two stories that that I'll share about how I arrived at my work. So I'm how do I start? So I'm the only Black female teacher in my school district. So that that means that during the height of the pandemic, I felt called upon to start engaging in my school in different ways that I hadn't before. And so that meant that I started working in the union. I started really pushing to get rid of tracking in the sixth grade class where I was teaching, in the sixth grade math class. And for those of you who don't know, tracking's like sorting students by their ability. So I was trying to get rid of that. And then I started a BIPOC teachers affinity group. So those were like these three things that I started doing last year, or no, 2 years ago. And so by last year, the first two, which were working as a part of the teachers union in order to, get us safely through the pandemic, that had fallen apart because we all had to go in September 2020. We all went in with face masks. We were the only school in the whole country to go in the whole time without like any special schedule. It was ridiculous and really dangerous and scary. And also I worked with a bunch of other teachers, and we fought to get rid of tracking. And then within the semester that we had gotten rid of it, a board member called and said we needed to have it back. So then we had it back, and it was even worse than ever. So moving through policy, I realized was not for me. I figured out that policy could really only get me so far in the constraints of where I was. But the affinity group was really meaningful and really powerful, and it was not endorsed by the school. And so I was thinking around this time last year that would be my research, that I would do. I would research this affinity group. But then I really remember, it was exactly a year ago because my niece was just born. I was sitting outside of Lenox Hill Hospital, and I was waiting for my baby brother to come out with his new baby. And I was reading Eve Tuck and Yang's refusing research. And it just put into words a lot of what I was feeling at the time, which is like, this feels like a really sacred space where we could grow together. And it was not appropriate to invite academia. So like when Cisco says like, it resonated. You said something about like, how do I make sure that it's applicable to my students and not just to me and to academia? That I really felt that very strongly, specifically because it was for us, it wasn't for someone else. And I didn't think that I would be giving anything to this affinity group through my research. So that was a really important moment for me when I realized that like before I'd been like, oh, research is gonna, you know, save the world. But then I really was like, you know, research can also be a site of violence. And so how can I be thoughtful about making sure that my research was not going to be like that? So that's how I got to what I already discussed before. And then another story that I'm just going to share quickly is that the little fun fact that I put in is that I'm learning piano with my 6-year-old daughter. And I thought that was just a fun fact that I added. But then over the weekend, I was thinking, because we have to practice. We only have like a half an hour, because a 6-year-old can't like do things for longer than a half an hour, really. Even that's a stretch after a long day. So we have a half an hour lesson once a week, and then we have to practice 15 minutes every day, three times a day in total. 15 minutes in total. And so I was thinking about how the way that we practice and how the practice of working together to figure out the songs is the work, right? Like the lessons are not the thing. The thing is like me and my daughter engaging in community, because like the baby's away. This is a time that we're together and we are doing this work. And so the work is like this constant thing that happens behind the scenes. And that was really a shift for me as a teacher, because I usually think of the work as being what we're doing in the classroom as the lessons, but it's all of the behind the scenes work that is not, that's behind the scenes, you know, that's the learning, that's the teaching. And then the other thing that I had to share is that she also is like constantly engaging in like little, like she likes it, she loves it, like being with me and doing, you know, practicing, but she also like, it's a keyboard and like she'll put on, you know, the special music, like it'll be an organ one day and then it'll be like something else. Like she adds in her own little, she makes it her own all the time. And that's part of like what keeps it also like music, and what is the creation and what is the learning is like all of these things that these rebellions that she's constantly pushing back against, like what's supposed to happen. So those are just two insights of like the practice and the refusal. That's where it comes from.
Thank you. I love that you said the work is what happens behind the scenes, right? I think that really speaks to the internal work that we do through this process of research, and how important it is to remind ourselves that it's always work, whether we're conscious of it or not. The work that we do is impacting us. It's a relational thing. So I would like to invite another panelist to answer that question.
I can go. So I came to this work during the pandemic when I started teaching online. And just like many things were happening globally, there was also, I think, a lot of things happening internally. And so when I got to teaching, particularly in person, I walked in with sort of my previous research ideas, which were about, you know, human nature and like what does it mean to be human. And when I tried to bring that into the developmental psychology classroom, it didn't work, and it wasn't working. And in the first 2 weeks or so, I mean, I love the students, they were awesome. And so some of the students were like, yeah, I don't understand anything you're giving us to read. Or, you know, I don't understand this assignment. So that was like a very humbling experience for me. And then through that process, I realized like, yeah, like none of these things actually really matter. What matters is like the relationship that we're doing in the classroom, right? So so before that, I had to also, which I think it's something that I do think is very important when we talk about stop teaching, we have to create the conditions that make that possible. So I had to completely both disinvest in ideas about reading or even the idea of learning. So, you know, I told my students, we're going to do collective test taking. So all of us show up, we take the test together, I give them the answers, right? So I don't care about the test. And I make that very clear to them. I told them, I don't care about the test. I don't care about your grade. And I mean that lovingly. I care about you as a human being. And I had to reframe the assignments rather than me testing their knowledge, right? Because at the end of the day, when I think about testing and by testing, I mean not just like multiple choice, but essay questions, all of those things, it's really about asking students to prove that they learned something to me. And not just to prove something that they learned to me, but that they learned what I wanted them to learn. And instead, I had to shift towards asking students more so like, what is this, whatever we're learning, doing for you in your life, right? Because at the end of the day, if it's not doing anything for you, then why are we here, right? This class sucks. I suck as a professor. If what we're doing, it's not moving something within you, and then themselves are also beginning to move things in me. So specifically, I watched this documentary. It's called Schooling the World. And it really highlights the violence that the education system, even critical pedagogy, does to people, because it is an imposition, right, of what they call monocultures of the mind, right? And having myself gone to the community college and having lived that experience of where professors demanded that you write a certain way, that you speak a certain way, that you agree with their opinions or things like that, I didn't want to do that in the classroom. And every time we would be teaching psychological theories, the department sort of demands that students know these very specific things that at the end of the day were not developed in their historical context, were developed by other people at a different time period, under different circumstances. And what students keep bringing up in class were things that, I think as Gen Zers, they were very concerned about, right? They were very concerned about the housing crisis or homelessness. So for me, I kind of made sure to bring that into whatever I was teaching, while also, checking whatever the department was suggesting. But in terms of how it has impacted me personally, I feel like, and some of you, especially Margie, who's here, will know this metaphor. I felt like I had to throw myself off the ivory tower. And when I threw myself off, I landed on the ground completely broken. And it was the students who saw the parts of me back together, but in a very different way. So they taught me a different way of being that I was not, I think, attuned to or had been desensitized by my own sort of academic upbringing, so to speak. So for me, it's almost like the process of dying and birthing simultaneously. And so it was a transmutation, a personal transmutation, which it's funny because the title of my dissertation, it's Transmutating Psychology. So when I saw this, I was so excited. But yeah, that's kind of my answer to that.
Thank you, Francisco. I wrote down breaking to heal. It reminds me of so many scholars, particularly scholars that talk about putting themselves in the work and how that's never going to be something that they won't do. And part of that process, like you mentioned, you said you threw yourself off the ivory tower, right? It takes that kind of self-initiative. I mean, sometimes people will push you off the ivory tower, but it's much more healing when you realize that once you break, you can pull yourself back together again with the help of community. I want to invite the panelists to ask each other questions. I do have my own questions here just in case folks don't want to participate in that, but I'd love for y'all to engage with each other's work and draw some new ideas out. Does anyone have some questions that they'd like to ask any of the panelists?
I have a question, but it's not something that I learned from Anna was that some questions are not answerable, but I'll just, kind of share what's, on my mind. So recently I heard this from an indigenous elder. And he was saying that times like these require us to produce less and to listen more, and that we're at that stage where we need to be listening to specifically non-human relatives, the land. In my work, it could be sage, psilocybin, rosemary, hape, you know what I mean? It could be ancestors, it could be spirit, so non-human relatives, right? And so what is it? And I'm thinking about Anna's question around, under what contexts or how do we get to a place where we recognize the sacredness in these simultaneous process of teaching and learning, that they're teacher, I'm trying to figure out a word where you can combine both, but it's teaching and learning, right? And so for me, it's, that process when I go out to nature, specifically now that I'm in the so-called Southwest and you have mountains and beautiful, desert and anyway, mountain lions. And so what happens, when I step out into nature, and so it requires me to be in a constant mode of in constant place where I need to humble myself each and every day and recognize the immense and sacred energy and wisdom that mountains have for me, that palo verdes, that cacti, that snakes, there's just so much in the world. And nature, right? Non-human relatives, they have been birthing and deathing, death and birth and rebirth. They have been lifing for longer than I have. And so what is it that they know that I don't know? What kind of wisdom are they trying to communicate to me? And I won't be able to hear the message unless I recognize that they, first of all, are wise relatives. And so I just wanted to say that it was kind of prompted by Anna's question.
Thank you so much. This is so much more than I had in mind. So it really is amazing when a dialogue happens like this. And Joanna, you're bringing so much well beyond. And that's what is so beautiful. Yes, when we begin to hear each other and really, well, I'm tempted to say really when we stop teaching, yes, and start listening, how much it can happen. And I wanted to add to this that if we say teaching and learning, then the problem is already right there with the word end, because the word end is so tricky. The same with nature and culture, for example. So as soon as we say end, we think about separate things. We think about gap, some gap between. We just are led into all sorts of traps, I think, with this, and it's hard to wake up. So only, although I think the world now, as Cisco is saying, is probably able to wake up. If we don't wake up now, then I don't know when, but because so much is going on and so much is at stake, in a bad sense too. But hopefully people will wake up. So yes, the word "and" I wanted to say, and the Rita is saying life in was leaving, maybe briefly also, not take too much time at all. I'm here to listen and learn, and I'm learning, by the way. I'm learning so much. Just one thing I wanted to say, because from so much learning and teaching through the years and on, but when I came across the best things said about what is important for teaching and for science and for, I don't know, but when all is said and done, the most important principle is this: anything goes. Anything goes. And this is such a magic formula, I think, for methodology, for education, for us being in the classroom. It doesn't mean, I hope you don't take it as meaning like not caring, for example. Yeah, yes, on a condition of caring and on a condition of being part of the praxis of transmutation. I will not stop saying it, transmutation. But yes, anything goes. Thank you.
Well, I just wanted to add something that first, Joanna, thank you for that. I think a lot about how I can learn to listen in new ways. And I've been, my first step, because I really don't know how to listen to the more than human yet, is I try to listen to my babies. And I feel like that's, without romanticizing them, I feel like it's a step in the right direction, just like decentering myself. And then the other thing, something Anna said to me, oh, right. When are we, if not now, when are we going to make changes and do what we need to do? And one of the scholars, I forgot her name, but Cisco will remember, that Cisco introduced me to, she said that indigenous scholars say that, or an indigenous teaching is that you can only swim when the water is up to your waist. And I think about that a lot, that, the water's rising and it's rising faster for some people, and that's why they're able to notice. But for some people, the waist is far away. But it's going to come for everyone. So hopefully we'll have learned enough on the way up, while it's rising, to be able to swim.
Thank you, Kushya. How do we become fish, right? How do we call on those memories from way, 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 way back?
Transmutation. I think the Ninja Turtles, that's the way.
I love it. What does anyone else from the panel have other questions for folks? I love this interaction that we're having.
So it's kind of both a question and comment. So to me, both the idea of birthing and dying and the conversation we were just having, I think about the need to let things die first, because I think, and this is of course drawing from Vanessa Andreotti, who Kushya sort of mentioned, is that so much of, like, at least in our Western way of being, it's so much about preventing death, like literally and metaphorically, right? We try to save systems that are dying. We try to save institutions that are dying and maybe should die. And so I think a lot about, like, how there also needs to be both the birthing and the dying sort of in the same process, right? So how we think about teaching and learning as one process, I think about birthing and dying, right? Like, how do we sort of like die off as the human that we've been so far, right? So that then a different kind of human who's more attuned to, like, what Joanna is sort of gesturing towards, right? It's born and can, I guess, move forward. And I'm sort of interested in, like, how are people maybe engaging with, whether that's providing death or like the death doula of the education system, or how are you, like, I guess, like, both simultaneously birthing things in your classes or in your scholarship, or also, I think, enabling other things to die?
I love that question. How are we death doulaing? I would like to invite the audience, folks who have been listening and jotting down notes in the chat. I'd love to hear your voices. Will, I see your hand. Good to see you again.
Hey, my sister, how are you? Francisco, mi hermano. Hi. Cohort 17. Hi, Dios. Well, thank you for allowing me to be here. I'm excited with all the work that's been presented. I've been learning so much, so thank you as a student. I appreciate it greatly. But I had a question just to kind of create a little levity, because I don't, the work is always deep, but I'm curious. So I have a question here that I typed in. So Siwanava is auditing Francisco's class, and projected on the whiteboard is stop teaching. There's a pause. They look at each other. What is that conversation like?
Ooh, that's such a good question. So La Siwanava is auditing Francisco's class, and on the whiteboard it says stop teaching. And maybe there's a piano, right, somewhere in the classroom. They look at each other. What's the conversation like? I think people will have questions like, who are you, Siwanava? And maybe La Siwanava will say, well, I am a mythical creature, and I, play tricks on, abusive men. And then maybe from there, folks will have more questions for La Siwanava. And I'm wondering if La Siwanava is also going to ask them questions like, oh, like, what do you mean, like, stop teaching? And I'm also wondering, like, does La Siwanava speak English? Can she read English? Can she transmute her tongue and speak, and shapeshift into, linguistically shapeshift into, the predominantly language? But I think it will be a very interesting, very sensory based, visual based encounter. Yeah, I think it'll be fun. Teach me, Siwanawa. Yes.
I love this exercise, and that you got me thinking. Like, I'm imagining this classroom, right? And we're practicing what I think, to Kushya's point, what little babies and really young children have natural access to, right? This imagination. One of my favorite quotes from Saidiya Hartman, and I'm going to paraphrase, is, "So much of oppression is policing the imagination," right? And I think in this space, we're trying to create and reconnect back with that creativity, that innate imaginative sense that we have. And so this playful, thank you, Will, for this playful nudge to remember the inner child that leads us sometimes.
Yeah, when I was listening to your presentation, Joanna, I wrote down that she likes to play tricks on men and that she laughs, because that reminded me of my classroom. They're always playing tricks on each other and on me and laughing. And, a lot of, to Saidiya Hartman's point, a lot of, like, the role of the teacher is to stop that laughter. So then to Cisco's idea of, like, what are you doing to hospice the classroom? I think that it's going to be through laughter and through play at first, because that's like a very awesome sneak attack that rebellions are created in.
I want to make a connection. I think that joy, the colonized logics, they don't want us to have joy. They want us to be cemented in pain, in deep pain. And I believe that for me, this presentation is landing on me as a decolonial process in many ways. And I feel that that they're so linked in around how do we undo, how do we stop teaching, right? Like, as radical as it sounds, I mean, I'm a teacher, then what do we do? What is our role, right? And so it makes us really pause and think about how do we listen to our students, to the people in our lives? How do we bring a different form of learning? How do we concretize that? And so, like, I love what you all are giving, and I'm just really grateful. You got me thinking so much about that. And Francisco, I miss you. Thank you so much for sharing.
Likewise.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you. I see Alyssa, your hand is up. Please share.
Hi, this is absolutely extraordinary. I think Will actually said it way better than I could possibly say it, but that moment of what you proposed of them just kind of like looking at each other, that pause, and in that space between of like, wait, what's happening here? And then what folks have said about, like language and transmutation and the kind of decolonial project of it all. But it got me to look up the etymology of teaching. I've heard Anna say, stop teaching more than once. And I love how all of the various folks sharing your slides, somewhere it was like citing Anna, stop teaching, right? But I was to teach, I was thinking about where's this come from, and it's one of the things that showed up on an etymology, whatever it's the Old English to show, point out, declare, demonstrate, to give instruction, train, assign, direct, warn, persuade. And then there's some old High German, to accuse, even to announce, to show, to point out. And then there's, you keep going, and there's some stuff about Greek and old Greek, ancient Greek, and all of this. But I started thinking about the Sigonava and as that feminism is inseparable from every aspect of decolonialism, right? As is trying to undo white supremacy in any way we can, which is a forever project. And all of those pieces of how she might come in from underneath and around and beside and on top of and like stop teaching, right? Like is essentially saying stop being a patriarchal white capitalist heteronormative blah 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 on and on, ableist fill in the blank, right? Stop teaching, stop thinking that you know everything, because actually there are millions of other ways of lifing. So thank you for getting me thinking like that, all of you.
That was beautiful, Alice.
Yeah, so glad to hear from all of you. Thank you for those reflections, Elisa. I know we have just a couple minutes left, and so I want to make sure that folks who have any lingering thoughts or questions have an opportunity to put them forward. Are there? Yeah, Anna, what's up? You have a point that you'd like to add?
Not to interrupt. I'm not to interrupt you. Please go ahead. Maybe just as a minute later.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, I was just going to invite any sort of closing thoughts or comments from the group.
I see. I just wanted to mention one thing, the importance of solidarity in all of this, because the questions in the chat were, how do I do this? What happens? How can I do it when there are tests and expectations? And there is no way to do it alone, any of this. And I think the big lesson, okay, bad word, lesson, but still working with Cisco, with Kushya and many others, Alisa, of course, many others who are here and not here, but it is about the importance of sensing that there is a shoulder, there is a person who understands that, who you can work with together, who shares with, who learns and teaches you, and so on and so on. So it's really about networking, like Kushya's work illustrates so well, as the group there and so on. Solidarity.
Always and forever. Thank you, Anna. Solidarity is plural, punto. Yes, Elisa, for sure. So this feels like a really great natural place to wrap things up. So I want to just thank everybody for making this conversation what it was. Yes, Sherry, I agree. I think that we have set the bar very high, but in November we have a really international group coming together. So you will not be disappointed. We have really great things coming forward to really keep enriching the wonderful things that are happening in this space, right? We're having conversation, but we're also making connections. We're also thinking of new questions to ask, and constantly unstitching ourselves from those rigid positions that kind of keep us back and make it so that we are not able to transmute, right, as we desire. So I just want to give a huge thank you to all of our panelists, the audience, and of course, a big thank you to our executive officer, Sherry Deckman, and our supportive Christine and Matt. We also are just so grateful to each and every one of you who are participating in your own way in the work of creating and sustaining communities of agency, radical love, and learning in all of the places that you are. We also want to make sure to give a plug to our Urban Education Radical Justice Student Fund. So please make sure that if you are planning some end of year giving, you consider the Urban Education Program. Please designate the Radical Justice Student Fund with your donation. If you would like to support that, make sure that you choose Urban Ed in the drop-down menu and then leave us a comment. We are using this fund to provide small grants to students in the program that need it. And it also is a way for us to tell the university that our program is so vital and needs many dollars and support to stick around. So thank you, everyone. We are going to call it a night. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and we'll see you next time.